Call Jamie Greene. Up to 5 minutes, please, Mr Greene.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The press gallery is long since empty and the rabble and theatre of this chamber has somewhat died down. And discussing race equality doesn't really fill the newspapers the way that argy-bargy over income tax does. But to the people to whom this debate matters, this debate is more important. We like to think that here in Scotland we are a progressive and tolerant society, and in many ways we are. However, today's debate demonstrates that we cannot take our eye off the ball. As the size of the ethnic minority communities in Scotland grows, the issue of inequality and equality becomes more and more apparent. In 2011, the BME population accounted for 4% of Scotland's population, but that was 6 years ago. And whilst the BME population is as diverse as any other part of society, there are distinct problems facing each community within it. As Annie Wells highlighted, by identifying specific issues facing specific groups, this Parliament has the ability to make a real difference by prioritising resources and targeting them at areas which need them most in the hope of tackling inequalities. Now, the Cabinet Secretary opened today's debate by pointing out some of the disparities in equality in minority groups. For example, they are twice as likely to be unemployed in Scotland, despite a high prevalence of attainment in education. And the Cabinet Secretary rightfully points out that perhaps teachers do not feel that they are adequately equipped to deal with and tackle some of the existential racism that students face as they progress from study into their careers. Pauline McNeill pointed out that BME people are twice as likely to be in poverty and have a lower rate of social security take-up, and that's an interesting point. Now, there's no doubt complex and often cultural reasons for this, but clearly there's still work that we can do in outreach and increasing awareness of what support is available to people. Graham Simpson raised an interesting point around housing and why accurate data is needed, and he made a point about whether or not the Affordable Investment Fund housing will tackle the specific needs of extended families. Fulton McGregor shared a story with us about how an educated and very suitably qualified young lady from an ethnic background struggled to find work in her field. He mentioned that if you have an ethnic name on a CV or a cover letter, you have to write to twice as more employers before getting an interview. I find that quite shocking. So what do we do as politicians to change that when we're not in those rooms or in the heads of recruiters in the private sector? If it's quite brief.
Gail Ross.
Does he believe that one thing we can do as elected members is watch the content of what we're saying, especially against minority communities?
Jamie Greene.
I do agree with that and what Gail Ross is saying. I think we have a duty to call out inequality, racism and all forms of homophobia where we see it in the workplace, in the streets, even in our own homes or family environments, but especially on social media as well. I'd like to point out today an outstanding mention to Anasawa, who gave us a very personal take on things. You know, we've had 5 parliamentary elections in Scotland and only elected 4 members from ethnic backgrounds. I didn't know that. I didn't know that we have 0 in Westminster at the moment, and I think that just shows, given the percentage of the population that I mentioned earlier, how little progress we have made in that respect. And he said that there is nervousness about talking about race in Scotland. I think therein lies the problem. Are we blinded by talking about how open-minded we think we are? We talk about sexism, we talk about homophobia, we talk about inequality on an almost daily basis in Holyrood. But do we do so at the peril of failing to discuss race? But things aren't all doom and gloom. It is good news that hate crime fell 10% between 2015 and 2016-17. And that is to be welcome. But perhaps in closing, I could make a plea to my fellow MSPs that working groups, reports, strategies, advisors, and so on are always very welcome and always very positive. But what are we doing to change attitudes, to tackle stigma, to call out racism and inequality when we see it, or when we hear it, or when we come across it in everyday life? Saying nothing is just as bad as doing nothing, in my view. Now, I do hope we can find more time in this chamber to discuss this important issue, because I want us to look back collectively, putting our political differences aside at the end of this parliamentary session, and be very proud of the work that we have done collectively in delivering race equality in Scotland. Thank you.